first question that I'd like to ask you, remember we're discussing the role of unions in the employment relationship. Yes. Yeah. So, given that the premise of this question is as follows, given that, and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, but the way I see it is that people's dependence on the government for things like social services and sort of, social services, but also things like, police protection, and other public services like collecting the garbage and so on and so forth, I think has been detrimental to communities and to families and to, to people, to individuals in terms of relying upon each other and building relationships between one another. An example that I can give you is, in Johannesburg City, I'm sure you've seen videos of this, there's 100 people going about their day, and then 2 or 3 people decide to mug one person. And then these other 90 people, okay, they just watch. They do nothing. 90 people, okay, are afraid to intervene in what 3 people are doing because they're not united. There isn't a culture between them. There isn't a social understanding amongst them that, we support one another, we help one another. Because that understanding is also not in their communities where they come from. In communities, we might be living in, next door neighbors. You might have next door neighbors, but each house is basically, I would argue, especially nowadays, to be on their own, right? We're sort of communities by name rather than actual communities, in my opinion. All right, and this is where I say, you can correct me if you're wrong. So my point here is that this is brought about by, no, I can call the police instead of me taking responsibility to make the change. Yeah. Right. Yes. And this is not just coming from the individual side. It's also coming from the legislative side, from the government side, because legislatively, if you look at what do you call these local laws? I forgot what's the legal name for them. In municipal areas, you're not allowed to fix a pothole. Okay, if there's a pothole, you are actually legally prevented from fixing it. You have to call the municipality, who will then get a contractor to go and fix it or whatever they do. All right. So it's that kind of dependency that is both encouraged by the government and sort of allowed by the individual that breaks these relationships between people and prevents them from uniting and taking up their own responsibility for their own safety, for their own development, for their own sort of so on and so forth. Now, having given you that background, okay, we're talking about unions. And I'm saying with unions, I see the same dependency by the average citizen, let's say the employee, right? Because the average citizen basically tries to find a job and work, and they're most likely going to be an employee. Okay, of course you've got entrepreneurs, they have the opportunity, but that is more difficult than just finding a job. Okay, so I find that my question now to you is, given that unions whenever they started up as an organization and registered with the registrar, they sort of proclaim the establishment as going to be the beginning of a perpetual existence, and a perpetual that is enabled through what they call perpetual succession, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Doesn't that go against, or doesn't that sort of feed in or profit from this perceived dependency relationship that I've just given you an example of?
Not necessarily. Look, unionism is something that is dependently there for taking care of the employees, and there is this interrelation with what is happening within government and what is happening within the unions, because after all, unionism has been proclaimed within the Labor Relations Act. Before you can even establish a union, you have to comply with certain sections of the law for you to be recognized as a union. Now, taking it from there would be, you see, when let's just say an employee applies for a job within a particular company, and the person is successful and get employed, then that particular employee will then be having a right to join whichever union that he or she would want to join. But the problem with most companies would be, or with most of our employees would be that companies appear to be anti-union. And when they want to join a union, they get victimized in the process. Whereas the company would know that it is within this employee's right to join any union of his or her choice. And that would basically create a fear amongst some of the others, because they would be intimidated to an extent that if should they join a union, they will be disciplined.
Okay.
Or should they join a union?
Yeah. Just hold on, because my question basically was dealing more with should a union exist forever is my question.
For as long as, there is this segment of unfair labor practice in workplaces, and employees would not have, I could almost say a place to go where they can complain and be assisted against the unfair labor practices of the employers. Because you can only imagine if let's just say we do not have unions, right? Employees will not have, or feel comfortable to approach the employers and say, look, I'm not happy with this and that. Because they will always be victimized. They will always be subject to disciplinary actions. And ultimately they will be dismissed. Now, if there is no union, because as unions, we have the power to protect employees who cannot protect themselves against employers. Now, if there is no unions, then it will be a disaster, because employers would actually do as they please. They will hire and fire employees without, treating them in a fair way. So my answer to that question is unions are there to protect employees who happen to be their members, because without unions, employees will always be exploited. They will be exploited, and so on and so forth. Take, for example, you see as a union, you have people who have legal expertise or people who have legal minds. And if you look at your union officials, for instance, if an employee or a member is dismissed and they come to you for assistance at the statutory bodies such as the CCMA, Statutory Council or Bargaining Council, even the Labor Court, they need somebody who has the expertise, not necessarily an attorney, because some of the things or the documents that they sign would have the document would be of legal nature, because there's legal terms on a document that a lame person would not understand. Now, if you have someone who has that background, the expertise, that person would be able to sort of assist you and represent you at the statutory bodies. Because it's very difficult for your normal employee or a normal member that is dismissed, go to the CCMA, because at the CCMA you've got two processes, which is conciliation and arbitration. Now, conciliation would normally be your informal process, where the matter is dealt with on an informal, and then when you get to arbitration, that's where the matter becomes intense. And that's where employers would be represented by either employer organizations or attorneys. So both parties can be represented. But in a case where an employee does not have a representation, the person comes against an employer at the CCMA during arbitration that is represented by an attorney.
So basically,
it becomes.
So basically, what you're saying
problem.
is, what you're basically saying is, okay, fine, employees, an employee, but talking generally, we'll say employees, they need to have someone on their side who is not necessarily an attorney, but who has the expertise, isn't it, to basically represent his or her interests. Okay?
That's correct.
I totally understand that, and I agree with that. Now, my question really is concerned about, the dependence of that person or employees on unions as a way that, a dependence that has the same impact on the relationships amongst citizens, people who are going to be applying for jobs. All right? Because what I'm really trying to get at here is that the workforce, right? These are people that are employed, are dependent on the union. All right? And being dependent on the union, they have now outsourced, okay? They have outsourced a role that is supposed to be played by people within their own personal social networks. That's what I'm trying to say to you.
Yeah.
So essentially what I'm saying to you, let me say it more direct. Just like the government has destroyed relationships, personal relationships, because people are depending more on the government. They're outsourcing. Right. So let me give you an example. You have your own house, you have a wife, but your wife outsources her duties to a domestic worker. Okay? You understand? So we have done something similar, right? Instead of us supporting each other as family members, as parents for their children, right? We say, okay, no, join a union. The union will do that for you. Okay.
Yes.
And what I'm saying to you is that is a bad sort of side effect of the existence of that dependence, right? Yes. And I think I'm putting to you that shouldn't unions be sort of temporary, where they sort of serve a transitory role, where in the meantime, they equip the population with the skills and the expertise to represent themselves. Okay, where, for example, I go for an interview. When I go for an interview, I bring my father and my mother with me. When I go for an interview, I bring my wife with me. You understand? Why? Because they are my family and they have a vested interest. You understand? So essentially that's what I'm trying to say, is that isn't the ideal situation to have the community play the role of the union? All right? Because the community is made up of real personal relationships, whereas the union is a relationship amongst colleagues who might not even live in the same community, who might not all be from the same community. Do you see what I'm saying to you?
Yes.
So let me just boil it down just quickly. Wouldn't it be better if unions did not last forever? They passed down the torch to the real people who are supposed to be responsible for their own safety, so that they don't get... Your family is the one that's ultimately responsible for protecting you and supporting you and helping you.
Yeah.
But right now we're saying in the workplace, the union is the one responsible. Not my family, the union.
Yes.
Do you see my point?
Yes, I see your point. Okay. But in a perfect world, it would probably work. But now, here is the thing. If you have a union being there on a temporary basis, then you are basically saying as unions, we must try and transfer skill to the workers so that they are able to protect themselves, or they are able to do what the union would ordinarily do. Now, you see, being in the unions are regulated by the Labor Relations Act. So now, if you have to have your private persons or people or communities rendering the same service but as individuals, then it will boil down to the same thing, that you need to adhere to legislation. You need to be registered as a private person or independent contractor, if I could put it like that, to be able to go into the workspace and represent employees in the workspace. But just to backtrack a bit, if we had to transfer the skill to the very employees in the workplace, remember, there is something that we call recognition agreements that the unions enter into with the employers, that basically governs the relationship, how we should conduct ourselves as social partners, us as unions and them as employers, and how that regulates that relationship between the two parties. Then you also have something that they call workplace forum. Now, the workplace forum would then be basically, it goes back to what you asked, why should unions be there forever? Can't they be there for a short term? Now, if there were no unions, for argument's sake, then you have your workplace forums, because your workers will come together and say, look, we are faced with these challenges, but because we are not used to unions or unionism or having unions representing us, or we do not have a union within this company that is representing us as employees, how about we as employees form a workplace forum? And then we will elect somebody in the form of a shop steward that you would normally have in a union, within in the unions. Then we select two people who will be our spokespersons. Whenever we have a problem, we talk to those two, and then they go and represent us. So those are the two things that we have. We have unions and we have workplace forums. Workplace forums would be when there is no union. And there is instances where even when there is a union, there would be a workplace forum.
Yeah.
So yes, if unions did not exist, I do not see that your employees or those whom would ordinarily have transferred the skills that we have as unions be in a position to represent employees in the same manner that we as unions are representing.
So basically, you're saying that they wouldn't, even though they had the skills, they wouldn't have the capacity to do it. Firstly, because they do not conform to the legislation. They do not comply to the legislation. They'd have to comply.
Yes.
But also, I mean, you're talking about recognition agreements. I think the name of these agreements is self-explanatory. It's agreements where the employer and the union agree that the employer will only recognize the union when dealing with employee matters. Am I right?
That's correct.
So basically, these people come as individuals and try to talk to the employer. The employer won't listen to them because they are not the employer already has a recognition agreement. That individual would have to go through the union to get
That's
whatever
correct.
he wants to say heard. Yeah. Okay, I understand.
Yes, because now just to add on that, I mean, if you have workplace forums, when you let's just say during wage negotiations, wage negotiations would start, let's say on first for March, for argument's sake. Then you go and have wage negotiations. When you meet with the employer will not necessarily negotiate with you. They will sort of consult, not consult per se, but they will call you and say, it is that time of the year where we have to look at wage increases. So tomorrow we'll have a meeting with the leaders of the workplace forum. so that we can talk about increases and so on, but they will not necessarily negotiate. So the employer will then impose whatever increase on them. And they will not be in a position to say, no, but we do not agree with what you are giving us. So they will not negotiate. So they run the risk of being exploited because they will not be in a position to say, what are the grounds on which you are giving us so little?
Why would they be in a position? Why are they in a position not to be able to sort of push back on what is being imposed on them? Why would they not be in a position to be able to push back?
Because they would not have a recognition agreement per se. Because remember your recognition agreement or collective agreement, as we call it generally, would detail the relationship step by step, and it will also make mention of the fact that the parties have this type of rights. So they will say you've got rights in terms of Section 12, which is access to the company. Mm-hmm. Because as a union, let me just backtrack a bit. You go and approach the company where you have organized members as a non-recognized union or an unrecognized union. Mm-hmm. And then you engage with the company, you write a letter and say, look, we need to talk because we have organized members in your company and we want to be recognized. Now, the first step is you meet with the company verify the information and all of that. And then after that, the company will say, okay, fine, let us talk about the rights that will be afforded to you. Let's agree on that. So the first one would be section rights in terms of section 12, which is access to the company. Mm-hmm. And then you have 13, which is subscription. That's deduction of subscriptions. And then the list goes on to section 14, 15, 16, 17, up to 18, for instance, which deals with collective agreements. Now, the recognition agreement will further detail as to how the parties will engage in terms of wage negotiations. All right. Now it details all of that. Now, mind you, your workplace forums would not have something like that. That regulates the relationship. They just may be advised by the employer to say, because the employer would not want to engage with unions. And to run away from that, the employers would come and say, okay, let us establish a workplace forum, and so that whenever there is problems, the employees can talk through you, and then you come to us, and then we deal with issues at hand.
Okay, so
they will not be able to negotiate.
Yeah. So from my understanding of what you're saying, the major difference between a workers' forum and a union is the recognition agreement. And
that's correct.
Yeah. Now, the recognition agreement is it? Sorry.
And the collective agreements.
And the collective agreements. Okay. So these agreements, basically, they adhere to the Labor Relations Act. These agreements, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
So does that mean that a workers' forum is not necessarily regulated by law, because it doesn't have any agreements, it doesn't have any sort of legal standing. It's just a grouping of employees who are not registered as a union, right? And they don't have any sort of legal document to identify them as a collective.
Yes. Look, the workplace forums are mentioned in the Labor Relations Act, because the Act would say the company would employees would be represented by a union, and the employees have also a choice to establish a workplace forum. So it does talk about workplace forums, but the whole situation is as such that, look, as a workplace forum, if I had to start a workplace forum and I have the legal capacity to draft certain documents, and remember, it is all about engagement with the employer.
Yeah.
You engage with the employer and say, look, because we have established a workplace forum, let us talk about this, like agreements, recognition agreements, and so on. But because from what I know is happening now, I've never come across any workplace forum that that go to an extent of engaging, of having agreements and engaging and so on. There's always a first time because, if we get somebody that is open-minded, very smart and so on, that person would come and say, by the way, since we don't have a union and you want us to engage on issues of substance,
wellness,
for instance, any issue that relates to, let us get something in place that will regulate this relationship. So they cannot say no. But I don't think I've never heard of such in any workplace. But they can actually go to that extent.
They can.
Remember the courts, the courts are, very open-minded. They would not close the door if you approach them and say, look, we're having this dispute. Even if you go to the CCMA, you actually task the leaders, maybe the two people who are leading the workplace forum, to say, look, the company does not agree with us on this and this and this. Nothing stopped them to go to the CCMA and say, we are not happy with ABC of the company and so on. So there is nothing that will prevent the CCMA or any statutory body to assist those who go to them, other than union representatives. So, and this is what I always say to workers. When you have problems, you have the right to dispute with the company. Yeah. You have the right as an employee, as an individual employee, and they cannot intimidate you, they cannot threaten you, and so on and so forth, because each and everybody has the right. If you feel that you don't want to use the union to represent you, you can, in actual fact, go to the CCMA, raise your concerns, and the CCMA will assist you.
Okay.
So it is not limited to,
So basically, I think I'm understanding you correctly. Workers' forums can have agreements. Workers' forums are mentioned in the Labor Relations Act, and therefore they are sort of legally recognized, and they are to some lesser extent regulated. Would you say it's a lesser extent that they're regulated by the LRA compared to a union?
I would not say to a lesser extent. It's just that they are not making use of that opportunity. Yeah.
So basically,
because if they could, then they would be parallel to unions.
So that's where I'm getting at with this questioning, is to say, it seems to me that actually there is no difference really. It's just either it's just in the mindset in terms of looking at the two concepts, but actually there shouldn't be a difference. Let's talk about just quickly. You mentioned earlier on that, look, in the question that I asked you, you said unions would have to transfer skills, and this is what I also touched up on, to say why not unions sort of function for a period of time and transfer. When I mean a period of time, I don't mean months. I'm talking sort of culturally speaking, economically speaking, like as a sort of a wide-ranging structural change to the economy. To say unions exist for a number of decades just to change the culture and sort of push the role of the union to the community. So the reason why I'm raising this again is that when you were answering me, you were speaking about an individual who has the skills, and you'd say that the individual would find it difficult to represent, his colleagues or her colleagues. All right. So I'm saying my kind of thinking, and I'd like you to comment on this. My thinking is that it's not the individual. So the union, right? If you look at the union, how it works, I mean, at any point in time, you have one or two individuals playing a representative role for the collective, isn't it? Because you can't have the collective talking all at the same time. You need a mouthpiece who's going to voice.
That's right.
So these individuals that have these skills, right? They actually are members of the communities where they live, where the company is situated, or where the factory is situated, right? Ideally, I'm thinking of this from the ground up, to say a company operating in a certain community should be engaging with that community as the union. So the community becomes its own union, right? And that for me is more powerful, because a community is made up of families, because that's what a community is. A community is a collection of families, and families are made up of individuals who are relating to each other through very deep personal relationships.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm saying that wouldn't it be better if unions serve that role, so that at the end of the day, people who know each other personally support one another in the way that the union is meant to support the employee? Wouldn't you rather be supported and represented by a person you know who lives down the street that you've grown up with, rather than be represented by some person who might be from a different area that you don't live, you work with them, you know them as a colleague, all right, but over and above that, your relationship doesn't go any deeper than that. Wouldn't that be better, is what I'm saying?
Okay, we have within the workplace, we have shop stewards. So now the relationship is as such that shop stewards are the ones that would represent their colleagues, the employees who are in actual fact their colleagues. Now, shop stewards have limited knowledge, and they also have limited capacity, and they are full-time employees of the company. They may not have the time to
educate themselves.
To educate themselves and or to educate the employees. So this is where we come in, because after all, the relationship with the employees starts with themselves and the employer before it comes to the unions, because we oftenly say we want to watch how things unfold from a distance. You as a steward have a role to perform. When there is grievances, unfair treatment, unfair labor practice, it starts with you as a shop steward, who's the ultimate family of the people that you are working with. Right? Now, when that person then represents the rest of the employees, because the shop steward would represent employees collectively to the employer. But the dilemma that they have with the employer is that when the employer does not listen, obviously they will have to escalate the matter to the union. Because in the workplace, it ends with the shop stewards. And if they don't find any joy, then they escalate it to the union. And that's when the union will then intervene and raise those issues, up to a point where the employer still say, no, we're not going to do that. We have made our decision. Then we go to the CCMA or the statutory bodies. Now, the community issue would be quite challenging, because unless it is regulated in the Labor Relations Act that community members can represent employees in a particular workplace that is near to where they are staying. For as long as it's regulated, it may probably happen, but for as long as it's not regulated, the same goes with how unions are regulated, because if you have your national office bearers of the union, your national office bearers are normally your president, deputy president of the union, and the treasurer, for instance, just taking an example.
Mm-hmm.
Now, those are full-time workers. They are full-time workers. So in terms of the act, they must comply with their constitution or the constitution of the union. If those three, let's just say they are no longer employees of a particular company, then they cease to become office bearers.
Yeah, because they cease to become members as well, isn't it?
They cease to become members
and office bearers.
And they cease to become office bearers. So if you are not an employee of a company, you cannot be a president of the union. So this is how it has been regulated. So obviously, if you have community members to be the ones to replace the unions, then you are in actual fact forming a union by virtue of having a collective of people that are representing people in the workplace. They have to be registered somehow in terms of whatever act that is in place.
Yes.
They have to comply with everything that goes with the Labor Relations Act, or whether it's the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, or all the acts within the country. Yes.
Yeah.
One way or the other.
Yeah. So, one thing I'd like to ask you is why is it that unions or the members of unions can only be people that are employed? Can you explain that quickly for me?
Why are members of the unions?
Why can people who are employed be the only people who can be members of unions?
So obviously, there are these organizations they call SANCO, community organizations that represent your community per se. Now with employees, because your employees are employed by the companies, and the relationship will be between you and the company where you have organized employees. So, that's actually a good question, because I'm just trying to think now in the context of having somebody who's unemployed, right? Who would want to join a union, but then what will the basis of that person be joining a union? Because the reason why you would join a union would be in a case of unfair labor practice.
Let me see if I can.
If you have somebody who's unemployed, then you obviously unless the person has a problem within the community where he stays. Maybe the municipality is treating the person.
Let me address it like this, because to my understanding, a union is not only a complaint tool, right? It's not only a reactive tool where the employee can rely on it to react to any sort of adversity from the employer, isn't it? A union is also an active tool, right? To sort of push forward the interest of the employee in the workplace, to improve the working conditions of the employee. Once those work conditions, after working conditions have already been set, right?
Yes.
So the way that I see it is that if that is the case, an employer hires employees from the community.
That's correct.
You see, and in doing that and bringing in someone from the community, I believe that the union is missing an opportunity in the recruitment stage to represent the interests. Because then for me, I mean, this really goes down to what is the working class? Is the working class
Yeah.
people that are employed or people that can be employed? You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah. To me, the working class is anyone who's at the age and who has the ability, right, and
Or the
skills.
potential.
Yes. To find employment. Yes. So don't you feel that the union is not going far enough by only coming in after the recruitment process has been complete?
Yeah, it actually makes sense, but we often refer to the working class as those who are working and not those who have the potential to find a job. I think if one could broaden that to that extent, then it would probably be a good idea. But as it stands now, because now there is this effect that you would have, especially when you have to represent somebody who is employed by a company. The first thing that the company would do is this a member of yours? And if this is not a member of yours, then you cannot represent this person. And that's where it boils down to, that all the members of the union must be legally subscribing to the union.
So what do you mean then you cannot represent this person? What do you mean represent this person where?
Within the company or at the CCMA, unless that person is a member. So if there is no proof of membership, then it becomes a legal challenge, because the company will then come and raise a point in limine to say, but we do not have record that this person is a member of this union. Until such time you provide proof, then it will be accepted. But other than that, those are the type of challenges that we are having.
Let me ask you this question directly then. Wouldn't it be because of the subscription portion of the Constitution that, I mean, if people are not working and they become members, they can't pay subscriptions?
That's true. That's true, because we never had a situation where we would engage with any person other than an employee to be a member of the union. Because obviously, as a union, we do render that particular service at a minimal fee that the employees are paying, compared to when an employee is not a member of the union and has to source in legal assistance from an attorney. So now imagine you have been dismissed unfairly. You refer the matter to the CCMA. Because the process is complex when you get to arbitration and you'll need an attorney. The attorney will charge you anything between 5,000 and 6,000 or even more. Whereas you as an employee and member of the union would be paying a minimal fee on a monthly basis, which ranges from anything between 40 Rand and 120 Rand.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. You mentioned earlier on community organizations. What did you mean by this? You were saying community when I was
there are those like SANCO, South African National like Community Organization, something like that. Yeah, those are the ones that look after the interest of your communities, households. Let's just say there are issues with electricity. I know that they are no longer effective as I have known them for years, but when you have issues, let's just say residential issues, you've got issues with electricity. The municipality unduly switches off electricity. I'm not talking about load shedding. Let's just say people who are not paying because they cannot afford. Now, what municipalities would do is they wait until December because they know it's festive. Closed. They will check all those who are not paying and go and switch them off. And they know that there won't be anybody left to go back and switch them on. And I remember a year back there was what they used to call Operation Kanyisa. When the municipality switches off, go on vacation during Christmas, during December, the community will go and switch on and embark on Operation Kanyisa and switch on the electricity for themselves. Now, whenever you have such complaints, you have that body that you can go to and say, we are having, as a community, we are having this problem and that problem and that problem, and would like you to raise this when you have your next meeting with the municipality. But now the only problem that we have now is where I'm staying, I've never heard of such. I know in Tembisa they used to be. When I used to stay in Tembisa, there used to be that where every once a month there is this meeting. They will give you this little slips to say there's a meeting on this date at that time, and then the community will come and discuss issues you raise, and you give issues that they must attend to. Now the problem then also comes where you have issue where the government is into a tripartite alliance with all of these organizations. And as a result, your community is not being serviced. It's either they are not serviced regularly or they are not serviced at all. Because these community-based organizations would then, like that one that I just mentioned, would then be aligned with the governing party, where people will be unhappy, and their pleas are not taken anywhere. The same applies to the unions, for instance, where you would have a particular affiliate, being in that tripartite alliance with the party, and then you find that members that belong to unions that affiliate with that affiliate would then be unhappy because there is no improvement in terms of their complaints and so on and so forth.
So do you know of any community organizations, because the ones that you gave are dealing with sort of political issues? I mean, even this, I mean, we are discussing political issues here, basically, but more closer to issues of employment. Do you have, I mean, does Sanko, for example, deal with issues of employment in the community or unemployment?
To be quite honest, I don't know
you're not sure about it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. You see, what I can say is I have had an experience where certain political parties will come into the community and then say to them, look, we are having this project, an employment project. We're looking for youth that can be employed in this particular project, and in assisting the youth getting jobs. And there was also an issue where I also heard people complaining, saying that, yes, but when they give this type of functions to political parties, they are bound to use that to their own benefit, by getting families, their close families, to be employed. I mean, it's open for corruption in any case.
Yeah.
So yes, being involved. I don't think those organizations should be involved in employment. Neither should unions be involved in employment issues where communities are approached for employment, because that is bound to go west.
So you're saying
in terms of
yeah.
Because people. The process will not be fair because if somebody comes to me and say I need 100 people, I've got jobs. What is the first thing that I'm going to do? I'll be like, okay, my cousin does not work. Bring my cousin on board. Mm-hmm. My other cousin does not work. Bring that cousin on board. Talk to a friend and say, hey, look, this is the situation. Do you have people who don't work? Take your friends. That process will not be fair because then you are actually creating this loophole where the people are going to either sell the jobs to people or they are going to invite their families to come and get jobs.
Yeah.
Now you have a big family of let's say 50 people. Now half of the 100 jobs go to your family,
yeah.
And then the other half go to friends.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'd like to just ask you, unions. I think the COSATU, is it COSATU that was established in 1985? But the point is, they've been around now for a couple of decades. And what I'd like to ask you is that aside from improvements in equity, which I don't want to downplay, they've been great strides in terms of equity, laws and legislation and enforcement, and unions played a big part in that.
Yes.
Aside from equity, how much progress has been made in employment equality, meaning in the equalization of the employee to the employer? Would you say that the employee is equal to the employer?
No, not at all.
Okay. So how much progress have unions made to sort of equalize that relationship?
The unions have made little progress because, there's a whole lot of propaganda that is created in terms of, the numbers. Sometimes they would say, no, but we have made progress. But there is no progress. If you look at the top structure of companies, let's just say a particular company would have a black CEO, for instance. Mm. And then your COO is black. And then you go down the ladder, the rest of them on senior management are white. Mm. That is a recipe for disaster because those, our those who are below the white executives will be stagnant in terms of growth. Because there won't be any, in terms of, if they have to apply employment equity or transformation, as it were, it's either there is no transformation at all. There's little to none. There's little to none because we raise those issues and they are not adhered to as unions.
They're not adhered to by the employer?
By the employer, yes. Some employers do not adhere to transformation. They will tell you that, no, we are doing this and that, but they are not doing that. We have instances where we have to refer matters to the CCMA, to the statutory bodies with regard to that because of their non-compliance. There's a whole lot of things that I personally have picked up in some of the companies where I'm involved. Mm-hmm. And we are still dealing with that. The one thing is relationship building, for instance, because there's a lot of power play that is happening because when you say to the employer, you need to implement 1, 2, 3, and the employer would not listen to you. And then if they don't want to listen to you, then you refer it to get somebody a neutral to deal with resolving the matters that are at hand.
That's the CCMA.
That's the CCMA, statutory councils, bargaining councils, up to the labor court.
Up to the labor court. So basically, yes. Okay, what does employment equality look like? Okay, let's say employers were to work with unions to equalize the relationship. And let's use one company as an example. So in this one company, how would a company look if employment equality was fully successful? How would it look?
Well, I think it would actually we would not have this issue of relationship breakdown, where you constantly have to fight with employers to improve or to comply with the South African acts or legislation. Mm-hmm. I can tell you now, there is no company that is on par in terms of employment equality. None whatsoever. I don't believe that.
Yeah. So basically, your answer is that look, the employees and the employer would fight less, basically.
Yes, they would fight less. They would,
but the company would look the same, right? The company would still be basically the same as it looks now. It's just that they would fight less.
They will fight less.
Okay, but what would cause them to fight less? They would have something would have had to have changed
because of the company not adhering to certain implementations in terms of the act. Because some of the companies they do, as I've alluded to earlier on, let's just say there are things that need to be done, positions that must be filled. They will bypass certain policies that are within the company. They bypass policies and get friends to come in and work.
Okay, let me just hold you there for a little bit, because this is basically the question you're answering now is the last question for this session, right? And I just want to make sure that I get clarity, because so far what you're saying is, and from what you're saying that the inequality between the employee and the employer, right?
Yes.
Comes from corruption, basically, and exploitation by the employer. But the sense that I'm getting from the LRA is that the LRA acknowledges the inequality between the employer and the employee, but it does not base it on corruption. It says the nature of the relationship is unequal. It doesn't say because of corruption, right? It says the relationship as it is. If you had the employer adhering to the law and everything, and you had everything was okay, the relationship is still unequal. Do you agree with that? And do I understand it correctly? Because maybe I might be misunderstanding it.
Yes. Now, remember, inequality in South Africa is rife. Obviously, it's very rife in terms of homelessness, for instance. It is mostly the working class that you will find to be homeless, and you are not going to get people who are in established positions or working for established companies to be homeless. So you'll find that there's people that have qualifications. When they apply, they don't get employed, and companies would look at those who do not have qualifications to be employed in certain positions. So they want to keep, the rate of the inequality within the workplace at the maximum, so that it's all about. I mean, if they have to employ somebody who's got a bachelor's degree, and the person who is in an executive position only has a matric, do you think that they will want to employ that person as an administrator, even though the gap is huge? Because they know that person can actually climb the ladder in no time to close to that level of where that person is. And that person, through studies and so on, will then achieve and become the next CEO of the company. So this is what they do. They would always even exploit people to an extent of not getting to where they ought to be. So inequality will always be there. there's no two ways about it. Even in the workplace, more especially. But South Africa is known for its inequality. The most, in the most countries,
Look, Aizek, I have to thank you so much for joining me today.